And you've just heard Runway Lights by ROJOR, and I'm delighted to be joined by the man himself. Hello, ROJOR.
Hello, nice to be here.
It's great to see you. So what can you tell us about Runway Lights?
It's taken from the new album, World in Flames. It's another track that I've written over the last couple of years. Done quite a lot of recording during the lockdowns, so I suppose it was one of those songs. What's it about? I suppose it's about trying to find a safe haven in a storm, if you like. And I'm using the analogy of a pilot coming into land and looking for somewhere to land and hoping someone's going to shine a light and get him home safely.
And you mentioned lockdown. You certainly were prolific during lockdown because you were releasing singles, EPs, there was an album. Was that a helpful thing for you to do to get through what were very strange days?
Yeah, I mean, I think for a lot of artists, I think lockdown, I mean, apart from all the obvious terrible things that went along with it, it did give that space to step back and reflect and spend some time in the studio, just messing about on guitars and pianos and coming up with ideas. And I just found myself on a roll where every day I was writing and just coming up with new ideas. So yeah, it was helpful in that respect. Yeah, it was great in terms of finding a space to be an artist. Yeah.
But I mean, you've been releasing music since the 90s, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how has it changed over the years? How has it making and releasing music changed in all the years that you've been doing it?
Well, you mentioned there about releasing lots of singles. So I think that's what's changed in the last couple of years, especially since the advent of streaming. So I'm trying to release something at least every month, every 6 weeks, which I'm not finding difficult, to be honest, because I've got such a backlog of material that I recorded over the years. I suppose in the old days, it was spend a year, 2 years writing, recording in studios, and then putting out an album. Whereas now it's so much more instant, and people want that constant turnover of material. Because I suppose we just live in a society that demands that instant access. So the main thing I think from an artistic point of view, as far as releasing material is concerned, is the streaming thing. It's just changed the world dramatically. Not necessarily for the better, but it's changed it dramatically.
Yeah, it's something I'm really interested in, the idea that if you don't kind of keep, it used to be you would get your 12 track or whatever album and you would spend your time with it and, it would stay with you for a long time. But now it almost seems that the album comes after all the tracks have been released on it. Do you know what I mean? Like, maybe not all of them, but some people are doing that, and perhaps more with EPs. There has to be something almost constantly.
Yeah, I did toy with the whole EP thing. Back a couple of years ago, I tried to release an EP every 6 months, but I found that even every 6 months was too big a gap in terms of release. So I've moved on to singles now and albums. So, I mean, you're correct in what you're saying, that I think what people are doing now is releasing lots of singles, which then go on an album that's released possibly after 3 or 4 singles have come out. So that in itself is a completely different way about approaching releasing music, completely different to how it used to be.
And in terms of a collection of songs, then, is it as simple as putting all the things that you've released onto an album, or is the album still a separate sort of thing with track listing and, what goes next to what and all of that kind of thing? Yeah,
I mean, personally, I still think the album is the classic format for releasing music. I've thought that for many years and I still think it now. I think it's struggled, but I think it will always, but for people who really love music and love to listen to artists, I think the album is the best way to do it. So I'm very much a big advocate of the album. And I think that what it gives you is not only the singles and the flagship tracks, if you like, but it also gives you that deeper look into the artist's philosophy and those tracks that perhaps wouldn't have got any airplay on a radio, etc. But it also gives you a deeper view into how the artist thinks and how the artist, not only philosophically, but I suppose musically as well. It lets you experiment with different styles, and you put those extra long instrumental sections in that wouldn't have gone on a single, etc. So in that regard, I do have an album up my sleeve, if you like, called Winter Stories. And it's a collection of songs that I've written over the last few winters that feel a bit stark and feel a bit lonely and a bit empty, and just carry that feeling of the winter, you know, the ghost in the chimneys and the wind rustling through the trees, etc. It's got that vibe to it. So I'm keeping them songs separate, if you like. I haven't released any of them yet until I've got probably about 10 or 12 of them. And then the idea is to put an album out that actually does have that whole winter vibe about it. Yeah. Not Christmas so much, but like a winter feel to it.
Yeah, I think that's interesting as well, what you mentioned about the album giving you more insight into the artist and you know what their themes are in their music. Most of my favorite albums will have tracks which were never intended to be released as singles. They were absolutely, you know, but they're standards and centerpieces off the record.
Absolutely. I think that's what the album gives the artist. It gives them the opportunity to experiment and perhaps be a little more yourself, if you like. Because obviously I'm a big fan of radio tracks. Don't get me wrong. I love radio tracks. And the lifeblood of what I do, really. I try to write things that have melody and have some pace and tempo about them in terms of the radio. But I do like those more reflective tracks that you can put on an album, definitely.
I can see that because a lot of your singles are radio edits, which make me think you've thought about how this is going to sound on the radio, you know, rather than just put it out as is.
Yeah, I suppose as a writer, over the years, I've tried to write radio singles, been very unsuccessful in many respects, especially in the early days. Because you're just learning and it's difficult. It's actually quite a difficult art to put. People sort of put down a radio track in some respects. Oh, that's just the throwaway single off the album. But I sort of have a slightly different view in many respects. They're quite difficult to write if you write them well. I suppose in today's music scene, there's a lot of radio singles are quite samey, and they work around the same chord structures. You hear them on the radio all the time. I'm sure not a lot of your listeners will know that. And I think the other thing is that radio singles have become unoriginal, if you like, whereas back in the day, you had to be original to get your track on the radio. It had to have an original sound or an original hook or something of that nature. Whereas now it seems to be a lot more about conforming to an idea of what the radio single should sound like. But I think I try to do them with interesting chord structures, and I still put middle eights in them, and I still do key changes and things that are probably frowned upon by the record companies. But I think I still like that sort of thing, you know. I think it's great.
I wonder if it's because there's now so many radio stations, online stations, that singles are released with the idea about where they're going to be played, whereas previously it might be singles were played of all different styles. Certainly on daytime radio, that was the case. You know, you would hear, you know, maybe a bit of rock beside some pop, beside some soul or whatever. If it was a great tune, that's why it was played.
Yeah, I mean, and all the better for it, I think. You know, I'm not a big fan of putting things in boxes and saying, you know, we should only play this style or we should only play this sort of thing. I think that the more eclectic music you can hear on the radio, the better, as far as I'm concerned. So I think that's a really useful thing. But I think the main thing for a radio single is for it just to grab the audience. Now, those 3 minutes that you have their attention, then, you know, use it wisely.
I'm interested in your influences, because when I've been listening to your music over the years, I've heard things like Prefab Sprout, Jerry Rafferty, perhaps even a bit of Deacon Blue. First of all, would you say those are accurate?
Yeah, I mean, I know where you're coming from. The Prefab Sprout thing I get quite a lot. I think it's probably the vocals.
It could well be, but not just the vocals, I would say.
Yeah, The Jerry Rafferty thing, yes, I get that as well. And again, the Deacon Blue, yes, that's that 80s vibe, I suppose. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, more than happy to be associated with artists like that. Yeah.
But who are the other influences that you have that perhaps people may not have spotted?
Probably one of the biggest influences I have is Bruce Springsteen. I love Springsteen's. I love the way he can write the radio singles in amongst his anthem songs. I used to be a big fan of the Police back in the day, when the Police were. I mean, they were a fantastically creative band. The drumming was fantastic. They had a great singer, great guitar player, so they were always a big influence on me. And then people like Tom Waits, the singer-songwriter from America. I mean, I like the idea that, I like the way he used to tell stories with his songs, how he still does tell stories with his songs. So I like the idea of creative writing and that becoming part of the songwriter's armory, if you like. So yeah, people like Tom Waits, Springsteen, the Police. I mean, I could go on. Yeah,
the Police are really interesting, actually, because they're a great example of a band who could pull out singles, no problem. Yeah. But if you listen to their albums, all their albums, there's a lot more going on there than just the singles tracks. And they had this, on nearly every different album, there was a different philosophy, different themes and ideas that were kind of running through them.
Yeah, I mean, probably, as a band, I've seen them live, and they're fantastic. The fact there's 3 of them stood there and they make that sound is just absolutely unbelievable. Yeah, like I said, great drummer, great guitar player. But I mean, Andy Summers always created sort of pictures with his guitar playing. It was atmospheric the way he played the guitar, and so it wasn't just all about rhythm and lead. There was lots of other colours and flavours going on there as well. And obviously Sting on vocals and bass, fantastic as well. So the combination, the 3 of them were just absolutely awesome. Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah. So what's next for you? Have you got? Well, we know that Runaway Lights is coming out on the 1st of April. But have you got future releases? You mentioned an album and touring, that kind of thing. What's going on?
Yeah, in May, the album comes out. It's called World in Flames, and it'll include the Runaway Lights single, Healing Waters, Place Where the Sun Keeps Shining, all the radio tracks that we've released over the last year or so. But then I'd really like to get back onto the live stage, because I haven't done it because of the pandemic, etc. It's been 2 or 3 years now before I've actually been out there. So I have a launch gig for the album in May, and then hopefully we'll get out and play a lot more gigs throughout the UK, hopefully in the next couple of years. That's the thing I'm really looking forward to. Yeah.
Well, that's fantastic. I hope we can catch you when you come around these parts. But Roger, it's been great to talk to you. Thanks very much for taking the time.
Thanks very much for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
And this is ROJOR and Healing Waters.